Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
A survivor from the lost continents of Mu or Atlantis, appearing on our modern streets, would have seemed no stranger, no more different from others, than the man who called himself Conrad Elkins. And yet I have always found it difficult to define, even in my own thoughts, the many elements which serve to constitute this strangeness. It would seem that the adjectives which would fitly describe Elkins were as yet non-existent in our vocabulary, that they could only be found in some unimaginably subtle, complex and refined language, such as might be developed through long cycles of elaborating culture and civilization on an older and riper planet than ours.
Greetings and welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you heard there was Shelley de Cruz, reading the opening paragraph from our first story that we'll be covering today. I'm one of your hosts, Tim Mendes.
And I'm one of your other hosts, Rob Hoyton. Yeah, we're covering two stories today. We were going to just keep this as one story because the first one we're looking at is rather long. It's almost a novella. But we thought we'd squeeze the two in because the second story is very short.
Yep.
And to be honest, as we'll get onto with the first story, I don't think we've got too much to say about it.
No, it's strange because it's like the inverse of what usually happens with Smith. You get a story like the second one, which is like 4 pages long, and there's a load of different directions you can spin out of it and a lot to discuss. Whereas this one is one of the longest things I've read by Clark Ashton Smith, and there's not really a lot to say about it. Strange.
Yes. And we're not alone in that view because Smith himself was not that keen on this story, but we'll get onto that in a moment. What I have to say, first of all, is Tim, we've been outpunned.
Oh, really?
We've been outpunned and outgunned by one of our patrons. Yeah, Mr. Brett Kramer has sent something in. He sent a message in and he said, wouldn't a carry-on movie based on the ghoul actually be a carry-on movie?
Oh.
Sir, you are a
bravo.
Genius.
That needs a rib shot, doesn't it?
I'm going to put one in. Here it is. Here we go.
Nice. Oh, bravo. That's a corker, is that?
Well done, Brett. Thanks for that. That made my day.
Yeah, you could enter the Dad Joke Olympics with that one, pretty sure.
So we've got a couple of news items before we start as well. Just a quick announcement that the Innsmouth Literary Festival, half of the tickets have now gone. We're half full. It's doubtful we'll be doing entry on the door. So if you want to attend, please make sure you book your ticket in time because we'd love to see you there.
Indeed. And yeah, just following up on that, we are proud to announce that of the Innsmouth After Dark, we have managed to book England's top Lovecraftian rock band, Arkham Witch, and they'll be playing a live set to round off the day. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the day and the evening now as well.
Yeah. It's going to be a good one.
And there's a new anthology just come out, I believe, Tim, as well.
Well, it's coming out at the end of the month on the 31st. Yes, and that has been curated by myself and edited by me. So, yeah, spot the typo. It's called Eldritch Investigations from Mythos, which is an imprint of Nordic Press. And it's 14 tales of occult investigation versus Cthulhu mythos. So, yeah, basically the classic pulp weird fiction. It's basically our homage to it. And yeah, we got some good names in there, some great stories. So yeah, that's available to pre-order now.
All right, so let's get into our stories. Well, actually, let's get into our favourite words from the stories first of all. The first story, I didn't have too many, as we'll no doubt discuss. Smith really seemed to tone down his language in this one, but I did get a couple of words. One was polyandry, and that is a woman who has 2 or more husbands.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. I think because I live in Brighton, so you get a lot of that kind of behaviour down here. Um, yeah, the first one I've got is a word I've heard before, but it's a very archaic term, and that's over-preponderance, which basically means majority or prevalence. It's just
Very nice. There was a word that I did know because it's in the Conan Exiles game, obulus, which is a small coin.
Ah, nice. I like it. Sounds like a character from Asterix, doesn't it? Yeah. My final one from Adventure in Futurity is hydrocephalus, which basically means water on the brain.
Best cure for that is a tap on the head.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you. I'm here all week.
Here we go.
And my final one from that story is, I'm not sure of the pronunciation of this, but Hegira or Hegira, which is from an Arabic word, and it means exodus.
Nice.
There were a few more words from the second story. A shorter story, but a lot more words in there that I didn't know, I guess because of the Indian setting.
Yeah.
The first one I had there, and again, apologies for the pronunciation, is zenana or zenana, which is a part of the house which is restricted to women.
Yeah. So it was like the saloon bar in the old northern pubs.
Yeah. Well, same in London as well. Yeah. Women weren't allowed in the saloon. Women in the lounge, wasn't it? I think.
In the lounge, that was it. The lounge, yeah, and the men in the saloon.
Yeah. And I thought the other nice thing with that is zenana is the only word I can think of that rhymes with banana. You know.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, my first one for that, again, it's an Indian term, is mahout or mahout, which is basically elephant rider. Like, it got me thinking what I thought an elephant rider was called up to then. Was it elephant jockey? I think. Is it a jockey for an elephant? I don't know. Well, there you go. Now I know the real term. So
that sounds some sort of old 80s insult. Oh, don't trust him. He's an elephant jockey.
It does, doesn't it? Sounds like something out of Only Fools and Horses or something, doesn't it? Yeah. You can imagine Del Boy saying that about Boise, can't you?
And sticking with the elephant theme, naturally enough, given the nature of the story, I had musth, which is must with an H on the end, musth. And this is a condition that bull elephants get. Basically, their testosterone levels rocket to like 60 times as much as normal. And so they become very aggressive and go a bit crazy and go a bit mad. So this is an actual thing. And they say this isn't an illness as such because this is a natural thing for elephants to do. So it's not like an illness or a condition. It's just something they go through every now and again. So if you do have an elephant, then just be
Make sure it gets its jollies.
Yeah, if you keep an elephant, I'm sure you're aware of all that stuff anyway already. You know.
I'm just glad that you said that because that's on my list. And I was like, how do you pronounce that?
Oh, well, I did check.
Ah, right. Yeah. I was trying to wrap my tongue around it. And I was like, oh, God. Yeah, my final one from that story is it's actually a region. But it's actually an old term for the region, which is Bundelkhand, which is now Bundelkhand. But there's Bundelkhand Legion and Fort, which in the upper provinces of Bengal. But I love that. I love it because to me it sounds like an old northern insult. You chuffing Bundelkhand. Yeah.
That's great, isn't it? That makes the list of things that sound like swear words that can be used in polite company, doesn't it?
Indeed.
All right, shall we get into the publication history for our first story?
Indeed, yeah. This is a very strange one. It's a complete anomaly, really. Aside from obviously being asked to write more stories for Captain Douchebag, Volmar, it's got to be the first time, to my knowledge, that Clark Ashton Smith had worked to a brief. It was suggested in a letter from David Lasser of Wonder Stories. And I've got the letter here. He said, we can use in the near future in Wonder Stories a good time-traveling story concerning the adventures of a 20th century man in the future. I would be glad to work the details of one out with you and help you to whip a good plot in shape. My thought is, in general, that you could show the adventures of a contemporary in some future century and make it quite realistic. I believe that you have the ability to portray local colour so that you could show not only the difference in the physical surroundings and the mode of life of our descendants, but also in their different habits of thought. Yeah, so Smith, at the time he got that letter, he'd written a synopsis for what later became the story, The Letter from Mohan Los.
Oh, right.
And he was struck by the similarity of what the thing. So he basically went off and he wrote to Lovecraft that it's odd that the idea of time traveling stories should have been so much in my mind of late. Not long ago, I received a letter from the Wonder Stories editor suggesting that I write for him a yarn of this type dealing with the future. I cooked up a synopsis, which was approved, and I'm now going to go ahead with the junk as fast as my cold will permit. Now, yeah, so it turns out that, Smith wasn't very well when he wrote this, and he also wasn't very keen on the idea in the first place. I believe you have some correspondence.
Yeah, he details this in a letter to Lovecraft. This is early January 1931, and he may have not been feeling well, but that didn't stop him from giving us a nice return address. From the dark companion of Algol, at the perihelion of innermost and uttermost occultation. Dear HPL, salutations to the companion in misery. Measles and chicken pox, I managed to have those at the proper age along with scarlet fever, are surely an offset to the whooping cough. The latter has been a tiresome business though, and the cough still lingers, albeit far less frequent and severe than it was. So basically he's been suffering from whooping cough at this time.
Blimey.
And he goes on to talk about this exact story. I finished the time travelling yarn and adventure in futurity and have sent it off, but I'm still hung up on the final chapter of the Volmar opus. I'll send these tales on presently if they seem to pass muster at all. Just now the time story strikes me as an awful piece of junk. The Venusian slaves and their Martian abettors are left to divide the earth at the end, while the remainder of humanity, which has been driven to the polar region, takes flight for the further asteroids. I agree with you that intercosmic immigration will never do. The Martians might smuggle in the black rot, which devours whole cities and turns half the elements known to chemistry into a fine black powder. Also, there is the yellow death, that microscopic aerial algae from Venus, which grows in the air, turning it to a saffron colour and causing all terrestrials who breathe it to die of slow asphyxiation with violent pneumonia symptoms. So, in a way, it's almost reflecting his own condition at the time if he was suffering from this terrible cough.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, anyway, he sent it off, and the editor was very happy with it. It was finished on December the 27th, 1930, and it was published in the April 1931 issue of Wonder Stories.
And this is certainly a story that I wasn't familiar with at all. I've not seen it in any of the collections I've got. And, well, I suppose it fits into his science fiction sort of genre, like we've said with the Volmars and the trips to Venus and that kind of thing. But, I think this is the first story I've read out of all the collections so far that was disappointing.
I do wonder how much input Mr. Lasser had, because obviously he said he was going to help with the synopsis and help flesh it out and things like that, because it does read like Smith is just working to a brief.
Yeah.
It's not got, because I mean, where it separates, I mean, like the Volmar stuff and all that, you got these fantastical vistas and strange protoplasmic blobs and all kinds of other bits and pieces and flora and fauna, which is very Smith. But there's none of that here. There's none of it.
There's very little colour in it at all, which is quite unusual. In fact, that little quote he told about the yellow death, that's the most colourful part of the story in that sense.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, there was one really good line on that I really liked, but yeah.
And I get the feeling he was riffing on those earlier sort of Venusian stories to a large extent as well.
Yeah.
And even the Antares with the, a human going to live on an alien planet. It was quite reminiscent of that story as well.
Yeah.
So we start with chapter 1, The Mystery of Comrade Elkins. And this whole chapter is basically a description of the strange acquaintance that this man has. We're in New York, I guess, what would have been modern day for Smith, and how our narrator is a chemist and an academic, and he sees a lot of this chap around at the museums and libraries he's visiting, and eventually the two get to talking.
Yeah, he's a good description of him. He has an extreme pallor, fine hair, clear-cut lineaments, and he had bright purple eyes, which because he's trying to work out his race, isn't he?
Yeah, it's very difficult to pin down in terms of his nationality or his ethnicity. I thought it was interesting we get this. Apart from the great brow of uncorrugated ivory, which resembled the one that we see in portraits of Edgar Allan Poe. So a nice little nod to Poe. And you can see that forehead, can't you? That's quite a good visual image.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And it's not just this guy's looks, it's his whole character, his attitude, his mannerisms. It's a sort of stereotypical grey man in a lot of ways. He doesn't seem to interact very much with other people. He seems quite emotionless.
No, he's wholly enigmatic, I think sums it up quite nicely.
And this man names himself as Comrade Elkins. And our narrator is a Mr. Hugh Pastor. And as I said, they start talking when they see each other at museums and libraries. And Elkins at one time says, oh, shall we sort of hang out together? Let's go grab a coffee sometime. And the reason for this seems to be, Elkins tells us, and by the same token, Mr. Pastor, I believe you are something of a speculative thinker yourself along different lines. I have read your little thesis on the cosmic rays. Your idea that these rays might become a source of illimitable power through concentration appeals to me. I can safely say that the idea is quite ultra-modern. So we start to get our first hints that this guy is perhaps not of this time.
Yeah. And from this sort of ice-breaking moment, they grow a friendship. And Elkins visits his rooms and laboratory many times. And in turn, he was admitted to his own modest lodgings, which I'd surmised were only a few blocks away from mine on the same street, which is another sort of coincidence here.
Yeah. I did like that line, by the way. I have read your little thesis.
Yeah.
Patronising much?
Yeah, damning with faint praise. I like that.
But of course, when you learn who this guy is and the fact that it's from thousands of years in the future, then you can understand his, I suppose you call it amusement, wouldn't you? Our primitive technology and our primitive scientific understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this friendship goes on throughout the year. The late spring and summer pass, and the mystery which had drawn me to Elkins was still unsolved. I did indeed learn from a casual remark that he was a native of North America, which failed to render his ethnic distinction any the less baffling. And one day towards the end of summer, Elkins says to him, I must leave New York before long, Hugh. And Elkins quite naturally says to him, oh, does that mean you're going home? It would be nice if we could keep in touch. And he says, well, yes, I am going home, but we won't be able to communicate unless you should care to accompany me.
Obviously, this piqued his curiosity, these cryptic words. Yeah. If you mean that as an invitation, I said, I shall be glad to accept and pay you a visit. Again, this puts me in mind of those holidays when you meet somebody and you're like, and then you're praying they never turn up on your doorstep.
That's that very English thing, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
You must pop round sometime. We didn't mean it.
Yeah, we were just being polite. Yeah.
But he explains that, it is an invitation, but if you accept it, you need to know where you're going first. You might want to know where you're going. And the narrator throws in this little line, it's almost a joke. Oh, do you live on Mars or Saturn then? Yeah. Which, given this is a Clark Ashton Smith story, is not beyond the realms of possibility.
Indeed. You can almost hear him chuckling, that. Ha ha,
And Elkins does smile at this, right? He says, no, I'm from Earth, but I have been to Mars. And this is where he explains exactly who he is and where he's from. I am not a man of your own era, but have come from a period far in the future, or what is known to you as the future. According to your notation, my proper time is about 15,000 AD. My real name is Krunos Alcon. I have assumed a vaguely analogous one of Conrad Elkins, as well as the speech and garb of your time, for reasons which will be fairly obvious.
Yeah, I liked the name there because it's basically a sort of bastardization of Kronos, isn't it? Who was the Titan and god of time. So I thought that was a nice nod. Yeah.
That's a nice touch. Yeah. Oh, now this is where some of the issues in this story start raising themselves. I think it's the first flag, in a sense, because at this time in the future, 15,000 AD, which is a long way ahead, isn't it? When you think about it,
yeah,
you think our civilization, in inverted commas, has been around for what, a couple of thousand years or something. I mean, industrialization, a couple of hundred years, really. So it's a long, long way ahead.
Yeah.
But what is happening in the future is this. Humanity in our age is menaced with gradual extinction through an increasing over-preponderance of male children, and a method of sex control, which would restore in some degree the balance of nature, is urgently desired. And there's a kind of legend or myth that they have that people in the 20th century were able to control or influence the sex of their children, their unborn child. So he's come back in time to discover this secret. I mean, that's almost sort of touching on eugenics in a sense.
It is, yeah.
And, you know, well, we can get into what goes on in China and those sort of places we know about. But basically, they think that in the 20th century, we have got the secret of choosing the sex of our children. And then we get the sort of prehistory of his own time, because it seems that our society and civilization is doomed. There's going to be an apocalyptic event. And post that, this sort of Amazonian society, as he describes it, developed this matriarchy. For many thousands of years after the rebuilding of an enlightened civilization on the ruins of yours, girl children predominated, and the whole world became a matriarchy. The period known as the Amazonian Wars, which were the most sanguinary and merciless wars in history, put an end to the matriarchy by wiping out all but a few 100,000 of the human race. I guess this was written before the Second World War, right?
Yeah.
So to Smith's credit, he didn't know that was going to happen, because I think to date we've got a, well, I mean, any war is merciless.
Yeah.
But obviously he didn't know there was an impending genocide.
No.
Industrialized genocide on the horizon.
Yes, when he finishes explaining all this, he basically turns to Hugh and says, "Now to become personal. You're the only friend I have cared to make in this epoch. Your mind is in some respects beyond the age, and though everything will seem different to you in our time, and much will be incomprehensible, I'm sure you will find a surpassing interest in the world of 15,000 AD. I shall, of course, provide you with a safe means of return to your own era whenever you wish. Will you go with me, Hugh?"
So you've got to ask the question, I suppose, if you were in that position, would you go?
Well, I suppose it depends how crap your life is at the time, doesn't it? You know?
Well, I was thinking that, but if you're guaranteed a safe return and a way back,
yeah.
And if it's time travel, you could come back to 5 minutes later, couldn't you? So you wouldn't even necessarily miss anything here.
Well, that's the Doctor Who with pretty much every companion, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess.
You know, it's that whole thing. I could show you time and space and then drop you back here like nothing's happened. Okay, the TARDIS is crap, so that never happens. But there you go.
You think they'd have fixed it by now, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So that brings us into chapter 2, entitled Into 15,000 AD. This is where Elkins described his mode of travel, which is a machine, basically, a vessel that looks a little bit, I don't know, in my mind, it looks like a flying saucer. Although I think later on we have all the usual knobs, levers and dials and copper wires and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I see it as sort of a cross between Wells's Time Machine and one of those 1950s B-movie flying saucers. That's kind of in my head, you know how it is. So it's basically one of those flying saucers on a bit of string, but with brass trim.
Some sparks coming out.
Yeah.
And he describes how before he came back in time, he studied the era as best he could. So he studied the fashions, the languages, the culture. So he would, to some extent, fit in or fit in as much as he could anyway. Yeah,
part of his research involved finding a place where he could land quietly without detection. Now, I thought this was interesting because the place which he selected after much circumnavigation and study was an inaccessible cliff in the Catskill Mountains, where H.P. Lovecraft set the story "The Lurking Fear." So there you go. So it's a good job the Martens family didn't happen upon them, or they'd have been in a world of trouble, wouldn't they?
Yeah, well, I did wonder with the Catskill Mountains if that was a scene of a lot of UFO sightings and that kind of thing.
Mm.
I think there have been some there. I mean, well, there's UFO sightings all over.
Yeah.
But there is quite a lot of folklore in that area, which is presumably why Lovecraft chose it as well. But also, there's another famous literary figure comes from the Catskill Mountains, Rip Van Winkle.
Ah, nice. I didn't know that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, so that's a nice tip of the hat from Mr. Smith there, I think, to that idea of traveling through time, well, by being unconscious, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty much rendered to oblivion, aren't they, to travel?
So a couple of days later, he takes Hugh to his machine and they prepare to leave. Elkins now donned the tunic and sandals of his own age, which he had brought along in a satchel, together with the duplicates that had been made for me by a somewhat mystified costumer. That's this strange thing, isn't it? He has to blend in. I was getting sort of Star Trek vibes off of this, was when they beam down to a planet and Spock has to put a hat on and, they're wearing sort of donkey jackets or something like that.
Yeah, again, Doctor Who, there's the room in the TARDIS, there's a wardrobe that's supposed to have outfits for all these different times and places, but they never bother using them. So you've got like the Fifth Doctor swanning about in a cricket outfit, it's just, but it's there.
Budget, I'd be dressing up every day in that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Today I'm going to go Renaissance.
Indeed.
Yeah, and this is where we get the description of this machine with movable rods, a notched board, winding up a clock-like apparatus with a numbered dial and 3 hands. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands of figures on the dial. There's no digital, right? Everything is like a clock face. You can almost imagine he turns the hands round to 15,000 AD and pulls a few levers. I've got an image of Peter Cushing doing that for some reason as well.
Yeah, well, Peter Cushing's version of the Doctor, that was very much that, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Also, De Marigny's clock from the Titus Crow stuff.
Yes. And he does warn him that, I think this is something we see in all of Smith's stories where you get this travel across gulfs of space or time. It's not a pleasant journey. You get this disassociation. He seized the large rod and gave it a powerful jerk. Steady.
Ooh.
I felt as if I had received an electric shock that was tearing all my tissues apart and disintegrating me into my ultimate cells and molecules.
It's almost like teleportation rather than actual time travel. It's like you've been obliterated in one point and then reassembled at another. It's almost like The Fly, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. You get that kind of feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
And as Elkins or Kronos explains, they are actually in the same place still. So this is very much like Wells's time machine, right? Where he has to drag the machine back in the house, doesn't he, near the end, or is it out of the house to get away from the Morlocks?
Morlocks, yeah.
Same place, different time. So they're still quite close to New York in a place now called Djama. And I like this. The country now is called Acameria.
Yes. Yeah.
Then he opened the door of the vessel and motioned me to precede him. I was met by wafts of warm, perfume-laden air as I stepped out on a stone platform adjoining a sort of aerodrome, a great shining edifice in which were housed various aircraft of unfamiliar types. And this is very much like Smith again when we see these. Well, it's not an alien world as such, but it is a very different world. It's very nice architecture, very graceful. There's lots of gardens. There's perfumed air. There's fields. It's not Blade Runner, is it?
No. I think this is the thing that I got from this is that you had flashes of it, and it was almost like he's reining himself in. So that's why I wonder how much input the other chap had, because you get a lot more what I would term more of the hard sci-fi. You get a lot more description of the method rather than the effect. Whereas Smith, it was always about the effect.
Yeah.
Like the sights, the smells, the sounds. It's more about the actual means of it happening.
Yeah.
So it's almost like Smith trying to do hard sci-fi.
Yeah.
And
like you say, you wonder how much influence there is from, the editor, or I don't know, was this edited in that sense as well, perhaps?
Yeah. Basically, the text we're going from is from a typescript And judging from Lovecraft's letter to Smith of April the 16th, 1931, it appears that either Lasser or Gernsback made some, quote, inane interpolations, quote, to what Smith had written, which have been eliminated in our version. So,
right. So it had been edited, but those have been removed. And there's some. Right. That's interesting to know. Now, there's one thing that I thought was quite funny here. Hugh has to change his name.
I know exactly. I was just thinking that.
I thought this was kind of odd because I suppose we can have names that we think of as old-fashioned or antique, but if you were called, I don't know, if someone was called Homer today, well, Homer Simpson, right? That's not unusual, is it? I don't know. And if you had a name from prehistory, people might think it'd be an unusual name, but they wouldn't necessarily associate that or think you were a person from another time. Yet Hugh has to change his name, and the one he chooses is Huno Pascon.
Huno Paston. Yeah.
Which is hardly that different from Hugh Pastor to me, but I thought that was funny. Yeah. So my question to you, dear listener, is if you had to choose a future name, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good idea.
I'm going for Raptor Pointo myself.
Tamano Mendizo. There you go. Well, that sounds a bit like a gunslinger from the Old West, doesn't it?
The Great Mendizo. That sounds like could be an acrobat or something.
Yeah, could be that. Yeah, with a big twirly moustache. Yeah.
Yes.
I could rock that. I could rock one of those moustaches.
It could be played by Burt Lancaster.
Yeah.
So that's our choices. What would yours be? Do let us know. So this place seems very nice. The weather is controlled. As I say, we've got nice gardens and buildings and everything else. But this is where we get into our second problematic area with the story, with the introduction of the Venusian slaves.
Yes, it's a bit...
Rounding a sharp turn in the path, we came to an open lawn immediately in front of the house. Here, an unexpected and terrific scene revealed itself. Two men, attired like Kronos, and a huge barrel-chested, spindle-legged being with an ugly head like that of a hydrocephalus frog were fronting a horde of bestial creatures who would have made the Neanderthal man look like an example of classic beauty in comparison. So we're introduced to two other species here, the Martians and the Venusians.
Yeah.
And I did like that the Martian has got these, what is later described also as squat toad-like features under a high, bulging, knobby brow, icy green eyes. It did put me in mind of a certain toad god of our acquaintance.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Wasn't there another toad-like race in one of the other stories? That one where the guy basically went from place to place. He ended up living with the toad people for a while.
That was the daughter Saturn, wasn't it?
Yes, of course, the daughter Saturn. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was the one where I had to try and pronounce that name of that god. Yeah. With all the Z's in it, I remember.
With all the Z's. You did a sterling job as far as I remember.
Yeah.
So the basic setup is that humans have been to Venus and brought back slaves, which they've bred in captivity. And the Martians have also been to Earth, but the Martians are traders. They're like an advanced civilization.
Yeah.
So they're trading with Earth, and the Earth people are using the Venusians as slaves. And this is quite, there's no questioning of that in the story. And the way the slaves are treated, like this very first time we meet them, there's a bit of an argument going on. So Kronos just pulls out a type of taser implement and zaps the slave.
Yeah.
You know, there's no argument or anything else.
Yeah. So it's no wonder that they start revolting, really, is it? You know?
No.
I mean, they're treated more like cattle than sentient beings, if you know what I mean. They're more like a herd animal, I guess.
And it is interesting, this notion of the way they look. They look primitive and savage, so they are. You know, this is going back to, this is your colonial attitudes again, very much, isn't it?
It's very colonial, yeah. You can almost see this Kronos in a pith helmet, can't you?
Well, I suppose he is an explorer of sorts, isn't he?
Exactly, yeah. It's very much a hangover of the Victorian explorer trope, I guess.
And we do get, again, this sort of put me in mind of Star Trek, because Kronos' cousin Altus has been injured by the slaves. Kronos brought out a bulb-shaped mechanism ending in a hollow cone, which he explained to me was the generator of a force known as OSC, a super electric energy used in the treatment of wounds as well as of illness in general. So that put me in mind of like a sort of orgone accumulator or something like that, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Or Dr. McCoy and his little widdly wee salt shaker. So they seem to have the technology to have perfect life. The weather's controlled. They've got abundant food. They can heal any illness or certainly most illnesses or diseases with these little implements, medical implements. I'm not quite sure why they've got slaves, to be honest.
They seem kind of superfluous, don't they, really?
Yeah, because don't they later on talk about they can manufacture food as well, although they prefer fresh food.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what these slaves are doing. And this, again, it ties into another unfortunate trope. This is Kronos again. The real problem is the Venusians. It was a dreadful mistake to bring them to Earth in the beginning. They are not only ferocious and intractable, but they breed with the most appalling fecundity in opposition to the dwindling numbers of the human race. Already they outnumber us 5-1. Now, that can play into all sorts of unpleasant things, really, especially given the time. And, well, we still have the echoes of that today, right?
Mm.
That brings us into chapter 3, The Black Rot, where things take a turn for the worse. So the weeks pass by, and Hugh starts to learn the language. He settles in. He seems to be fairly comfortable. I thought this was one thing with this. Actually, I'll raise this now. The brief for the story was a guy goes into the future and things are very different. And we even get that expression from Kronos about, of course, you won't really understand anything that's going on. It's all going to be very different.
Yeah.
This to me seems exactly the same as what was happening in America at the time. It doesn't seem any different at all.
There's segregation and all that kind of business, yeah.
Mm.
It's strange as well because one day Cronus shows him a cabinet full of objects recovered from the ruins of New York and other antique cities, among them porcelain dinner plates, Masonic emblems, pearl necklaces, etc., etc. So there is that kind of familiarity. It's there, you know, as well. So
yeah. And I guess it is interesting to speculate on what will the archaeologists of the future find. And unless... I mean, if you think we look back, we don't even know what the pyramids were for, really. Those huge structures, Stonehenge, all of these things, we've got vague notions, but there's nothing written down to say, oh, this is what we use this for. So, yeah, if you picked up a spark plug in 5,000 years' time, what is this? Is it some religious token or icon, or is it part of some machine? Or, you know, you wouldn't know what to associate it with particularly, would you?
No. I'd just like to be there when the archaeologists of the future uncover that landfill where Atari put all them cartridges of the E.T. video game. You know, there's thousands of these cartridges of that crap video game in a landfill somewhere. What is this?
Can you imagine? And here we get more of the background story of the world at that time, more about how the Venusians came to be brought to Earth.
Yep.
And again, Venus is the jungle planet. With Smith, Venus is always the jungle planet. And it's very much parallels history on Earth, because the native inhabitants of Venus were sort of seduced by alcohol and weapons and shiny things. It's a very familiar story. Yeah.
And you get the same thing with the Martians, don't you? Because they came to Earth mainly as traders, but they also brought a drug that basically got the entire human race addicted.
Yes. The use of a strange drug known as gnultan, the juice of a Martian weed. This drug was more powerful than opium or hashish and gave rise to even wilder visions, but its effects were physically harmless. Sounds like the perfect drug.
Yeah.
And that's been banned. Again, I'm not sure. Well, you can speculate why that would be banned. If there's no harmful physical or mental effects, why would that be banned? Is it stopping people from going to work or something? Or
is it just really addictive? And basically everybody's giving their money to the Martians. Is it a sort of a fiscal issue, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. And there's an interesting thing there that we colonized the Venusians and now the Martians are colonizing us.
Yeah,
So there is that sort of reversal, I suppose, in a sense.
yeah,
And you think of the Opium Wars, right, in China.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I always thought as a kid when I read about those, I didn't realize it was the British taking opium into China.
yes, yeah.
I thought it was the Chinese trying to protect the opium trade, and actually it was the complete opposite.
Mm, yeah. Again, bunch of miscreants in pith helmets
Yeah.
and tweed.
And tweed. Opium and tweed. That's
Oh, that's a great album title, isn't
I
it?
was just saying it could be like an aftershave for chaps.
The Chap Olympics, sponsored by Opium and Tweed.
Marvelous. Yeah, so basically there's globally the Venusians are kicking off a bit and tensions are rising. And there's all sorts of rumors going around that the Martians are behind this as well. It's the Martians stirring up all this trouble. And things, as I say, get worse because we get an outbreak of a bizarre mineral plague known as the Black Rot. One by one, the buildings in the suburbs of Djama were being attacked by this novel disease, which caused their synthetic stone and metal to dissolve inch by inch in a fine black powder. And the speculation is that this is a microorganism introduced from Venus, where it had been first seen. And it's been introduced deliberately as an act of sabotage.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? It's like a precursor to the bacteriological warfare and anthrax attacks and all that kind of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because this affects the buildings. It's not affecting the people as such, but of course, if you destroy the infrastructure, if all your road and rail and transport and everything else has gone, well, you think your power plants and all the rest. That's an effective weapon, isn't it? That.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And this bit made me laugh as well. Though, of course, they're going to have a meeting. I think it's the 200 top scientists of the time will get together, and Hugh is invited along. I think out of politeness as much as anything, and you can imagine this huddle of top scientists all going blah 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 blah, and Hugh stands up and sort of puts his hand up and goes, "Have you thought of trying radium?"
I love that. I did like that.
That was quite funny again.
Yeah. Is it not possible that radium might be of some use in combating the plague? I believe you would tell me that radium, like any other element, is easy manufacturable nowadays. Yeah, and Kronos is like, that is a striking inspiration, old chap. I added the old chap, but you see, it's that kind of conversation, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so they go, never thought of that. We'll give it a try. This is something that happens a bit in this story as well, I find, is you get this quite big build-up. I mean, this is like 2 or 3 pages of the Black Rot, and then in a few lines, it's sorted. They get the radium out. To the vast relief of the people of the Djama, the plague was pronounced under control. So there we go. That's dealt with.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because whereas a lot of Smith's stories, he likes to leave things ambiguous. This is like he ties neat little bows on the end of each chapter.
Yeah.
So I find it very strange and quite jarring in a way, because it's like, because I mean, this is the thing. When he was going on about the Black Rot, I was like, all right, cool, I'm getting into this now.
Yes.
And then by the end of that chapter, done.
It's done. Yeah. It takes away any tension, doesn't it? And, I almost think in a way there's a novel in this.
Yeah.
This could be expanded out and you can see it again, like most Smith stuff, it can be very cinematic. You can visualize a lot of this.
Oh, yeah.
But imagine that in the film, you get these great scenes of cities crumbling. There's the meeting. Oh, there we go. Spray that on. Done.
Yeah. There's some little spod from from thousands of years.
Yeah. Guys going around with those little DDT things.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. Done. So it makes you feel that when there is something bad happens, there's no real threat to it. Something's going to turn up, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a strange story. I wonder if he had in mind of having it serialized, because you can almost see these as like almost pieces of flash fiction, can't you? Being serialized.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah. But anyway, just because the Black Rot has gone doesn't mean that there's no danger, because chapter 4 is headed "Captured by Cannibals."
which I thought was a great title. And again, got me all excited. Like, here we go.
So Hugh becomes a bit of a celebrity now because he saved the day with his radium cure, his radium spray. And this is where we get into our third problematic area. It sounds like I'm a little bit down on Smith, but I think, you know, if we take Smith at his word that this was just blasted out to be printed in a magazine and get paid for, I can see why he writes like this. It's very much of its time.
Yeah.
And in a way, it doesn't feel Smithian.
Now, that's the thing. If you told me this was somebody else, I'd believe it. I wouldn't. Yeah. If I'd have just read this with no title on it, there's no way I would have thought this was Clark Ashton Smith. And I think that's the really strange thing about it. Yeah. I mean, like, mechanically, it's not a bad story. It's just when you put it against the rest of Smith's work, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's really strange.
So he starts describing the inhabitants of the city around him. A throng of foot passengers engaged my attention most. Both sexes and all ages were attired in gaily coloured costumes. I was impressed by the practical absence of noise, tumult, and hurry. All was orderly, tranquil, unconfused. From the scarcity of women in the crowd, I realised how true were the racial fears expressed by Kronos. The women whom I saw were seldom beautiful or attractive according to 20th century standards. In fact, there was something almost lifeless and mechanical about them. It was as if the sex had long reached the limit of its evolutionary development and was now in a state of stagnation or virtual retrogression. So the women are in a state of regression because they don't look pretty.
Yeah, that's a strange one, isn't it? Yeah. And this is where you get the bit about the polyandry, because obviously there's a lot more men than there are women. So basically the women all have to have several husbands. It's like the reverse harem, isn't it? So
I did like this little section, though, because he wanders through the human part and he ends up in the Martian quarter of town, where dwelt a considerable colony of these mysterious outsiders. Some of them had transported their own many-angled and asymmetrical architecture to Earth. Their houses defied the rules of geometry, one might almost say those of gravity, and the streets about them were full of exotic odours, amongst which the stupefying reek of the drug Nortan was predominant. The place allured me even though it disturbed me, and I strolled often through the tortuous alleys. So there's a nice little Lovecraftian section, is it? Non-Euclidean houses and tortured alleyways, or tortuous alleyways, I should say.
Non-Euclidean, I love it. Yeah.
And I always wonder what things that defy geometry look like.
Yeah. What was it like when that the Donald Wandre story we covered, the Tree Men, the strange thing on the hill? Yeah.
Yes,
It's like, I spent hours thinking about that and what it might look like.
And this is where our protagonist gets grabbed by the cannibals.
Sounds painful. Yeah, one afternoon he'd been out later than usual, and as he was passing through the city, he noticed that there was a few Venusians in the throng, and overheard rumours of fresh revolts. However, I paid little attention to these at the time. Twilight had overtaken me when I returned back from the open country towards the Martian quarter, and this is where basically, yeah, wrong part of town, wrong time. It's that moment in it, you know, you're in a dodgy estate somewhere and night falls.
And we get the next of our tropes because now we're in cannibal territory. So, of course, he wakes up next to another fellow who has been captured. And it's actually a big metal grill that's being slowly heated. But it's the cooking pot, basically, isn't it? It's that trope.
I actually thought that was quite interesting as a chef. They're waiting for the fire to die down. And they got this big, it's basically like a giant gridiron, this large sheet of metal. So they lower it onto the flames when the flames have died down and basically broil them alive in their own juices. And so basically they're being braised. Yeah.
You're looking for cooking tips.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Long pig. Yeah, there we go.
I know times are hard here. I know the cost of shopping is going up, but they do live in a block of flats. You've got the perfect cover.
Well, high rise, isn't it?
Yeah.
The cannibals that live in it.
Yeah. No one's seen Mrs. Smith for a few weeks. Tim, you're looking very plump and sleek.
Yeah. are your hands shaking? Yeah.
And it turns out that this guy who is tied up with is a slave owner. And again, we it's this language again of savages. Although they're not as unintelligent as people might believe. Well, perhaps if you'd have stopped and actually spoken to them and asked them, you might have found that out.
Yeah.
Rather than just
sort of zapping them with bloody cattle prods and God knows what. Yeah.
And this is where we get confirmation that the Venusians are being helped by the Martians, and it was the Martians who smuggled in the black rot. And there's no sort of telling what sort of plague they will loose next. There are some queer and frightful things on those alien planets, things that are deadly to terrestrials, though harmless enough to the natives. I fear that the end of human supremacy, interesting choice of words, is near at hand. So again, this is not different, is it?
No. It's yeah.
You know, this could almost be Alabama in the 1920s.
Yeah.
So things look bad. They're about to put him on the fire and braise him, did you say?
Yeah, no.
But Kronos turns up with the cavalry, air car, laser guns, all the rest of it.
In the nick of time. Yeah, it turns out that when he hadn't returned, he basically scanned around with this device and saw that there was Venusians at a fire, and then spotted what he was like, oh, there's my mate. So they just zoomed straight out there. Again, it's like building this tension and threat, and it's dealt with. Done.
Yeah, in a matter of lines. Yeah. Like they turn up, zap everyone, and we're done. Yeah, right at the end of the chapter again. It's sort of the opposite of a cliffhanger, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. I
don't know what that'd be, like a cliffhanger with a big safety net underneath. I'm not sure what you'd call that, but well, I suppose we do get an element of cliffhanger at the end because Kronos tells him that it's kicked off worldwide. It really has gone off big time now. Asia and Australia are already under the control of slaves, and a desperate struggle is going on throughout Achameria. And now they've put the stun guns away, and they've got out the heat ray generators, which kill. So things have escalated.
I like that. I like the fact they're using a heat ray on the Martians. That's a basically turnaround, isn't it, from War of the Worlds, you know?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah. And chapter 5, the struggle for the world. So this details now this huge war that's going on, which kind of put me in mind in a bit of Planet of the Apes. And we do get those new plagues unleashed as well.
Yeah, and one thing I did like here is that in the western part of Achameria, great clouds of a vicious and deadly Martian insect had appeared, an insect which multiplied with the most damnable rapidity. In other sections, gases had been freed in the air that were harmless to both Venusians and Martians, but deleterious to human beings. And also you've got the vegetable molds from Venus, which fed like malignant parasites on all terrene plant forms. So this is where it's really like getting to the stuff that I can sink my teeth into, right? You got bugs, fungus monsters, you know, it's like, yeah, come on.
Yeah. Noxious gases. I mean, it's hitting on every level, isn't it? I mean, the insects I thought was that was biblical, wasn't it? That
yeah, it's the plague of locusts.
And again, you can imagine that in the film, right? That's very cinematic. The great scenes you could have across the world. I'm thinking like World War Z, that kind of thing. You know, those huge vistas of zombies attacking cities. You know. So it has got something in there, this story, but it's
very much so. It's like I say, it was weird. It was a bit like a roller coaster ride for me, this one, because there was bits where I was going, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. That's good. Oh, and then they've just taken it out. It's just a really strange structure for me.
So Kronos says we need to get back to my estate because he wants to make sure his time machine is okay. So they get in the it's like a monoplane, I think, and it's described as being atomic powered because obviously everything in the future is going to be atomic powered. I thought that was another nice little sort of trope, wasn't it?
That's actually very interesting because that sort of atomic boom, so to speak, where everything was going to be atomic powered, sort of started like in earnest in the 50s, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, you know, everything in that generation it was all like, oh yeah, we're gonna have nuclear powered this and nuclear powered that and nuclear powered the other.
Yeah.
So it was kind of forward thinking in a way.
It is, but in another sense, it didn't really last long, did it? Because apart from nuclear power stations, I think there was one of those Harry Enfield, Cholmondeley Warner episodes where they looked to the future and someone was putting a lump of plutonium on the fire, to heat them up.
Yes.
But perhaps that's what it was. We discovered that atomic power comes with this terrible price, and all the attendant problems. The thought of having an atomic engine in your car is quite terrifying, really. You'd need so much lead in your seat, wouldn't you?
Oh, God. Yeah.
Car would be so heavy.
Lead underwear, wouldn't you? Lead-lined undercrackers. Yeah.
It could catch on.
Kinky.
So we get a bit of a fight scene. There's a little bit of action at the estate where we get the monoplane swooping in, flying only a few feet above the ground and mangling. Well, the slaves get mangled by the sharp prow of the flyer, so they're basically running them over. And Altus and Hugh are manning the heat ray projectors, which are shooting up the rest of the revolting slaves.
Yeah, that brings to mind like them scenes in things like Battle of Britain and Dam Busters.
Yes, yes, or Apocalypse Now,
or even Apocalypse Now, yeah,
the attack on the village kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the war is not going well because the Martians now declare open hostility and they've destroyed all the human embassies and trading stations on Mars and seized a vast amount of ether shipping. And they've got their own weapon. This is another inversion again. They've got the Zero Ray, which is like a cold ray. It gives fatal frostbite.
Yeah.
I thought it was like the heat ray and the cold ray.
Yeah, they've also got another unknown ray, which is almost like an anti-tank weapon. So when they launch explosives or missiles or whatever at the Martians, they use this other ray and it just explodes them in midair. Which sounds like a great defense thing. It's almost like Ronald Reagan's Star Wars project, doesn't it? Them lasers in space that are supposed to take out nuclear weapons. Yeah.
There was a great video game where you did that. Do you remember that one where the missiles were coming in?
Missile Command.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah, Missile Command.
Okay. So that brings us into the final chapter, chapter 6, The Departure. So things are going really shit for humankind. We're on the back foot. I think there's more plagues are released. We've got the Martians attacking as well. And of course, there's loads of refugees coming in from outlying plantations. I guess that's where the slaves work, on these plantations, but it never really says what they're growing on the plantations.
No.
And again, why you'd need them. You would have thought everything would have been mechanized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the kind of final plague is another microorganism, a sort of aerial algae which spread and increased with phenomenal celerity, was rendering the air unbreathable for human beings over a vast and ever-growing area. So, again, we can speculate that might tie in with the whooping cough that Smith was unfortunately suffering from at the time.
Yeah, the Yellow Death.
Yeah, you can imagine those horrible, slow-moving, billowing clouds across that wasteland. Must have been an awful sight. But again, very cinematic image, right?
Yeah.
But luckily, they've got air masks, so that's all right. Again, the tension is totally taken out of it.
Yeah.
But it does mean that mankind has to now head up to live in the Arctic Circle, because that's the only place that is safe. And basically, when they gather in the Arctic, they're then making further plans just to leave Earth. They've established colonies on various asteroids. I think they mentioned Ceres, which is I think that's in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter.
Yeah, because he's supposed to be going to Pallas, isn't he? I just wonder if they're the same places that have been colonized by the Mi-Go. Because they had outposts on all the different asteroids and all the rest of it, didn't they?
They did.
Because you can imagine they get the Pallas and there's a bunch of
out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah.
But the Mi-Go, of course, don't need spaceships, do they? Because they can use their interstellar wings. So there's this quite orderly evacuation or this exodus going on as humanity leaves Earth. And Kronos, Altos, and Hugh are pretty much the last to leave.
Yeah, and basically, as everybody goes, ship by ship, fleet by fleet, Kronos turns to Hugh and so basically smiles with an odd wistfulness. It's time for me to go, and time for you also. Goodbye, Hugh. We shall not meet again. Remember me sometimes. Remember the final fate of the human race when you are back on your own epoch. It's as simple as that, isn't it? It's like he was there, he was supposed to be going to Pallas, and then basically Kronos turned around and said, no, that's it, off you pop.
Yeah. And he shows him how to use the time machine to get back to exactly the right place in 1930. And that's how it ends. He pressed my hand briefly and climbed aboard the space liner. He and Altus waved to me through the thick crystal of the sealed port as the huge vessel rose in the air for its flight upon the interplanetary void. Sadly, regretting almost that I had not insisted upon accompanying them, I locked myself in the time vessel and pulled the lever which would begin my own flight across the ages. That's it. That's the end. So it's an odd sort of flat ending in a way as well, isn't it? But that's happened all throughout, as we've already sort of said.
The thing is, it's almost like Smith is trying to be too conventional here, because that does read like 100 other sci-fi stories of the era. You know, if you were to pick up like Astounding Stories from that era, there'd be several stories like that in the same issue, you know. Because that was the thing, wasn't it? That was how the sci-fi was done at that point. It's almost like he's been given this brief, he's not feeling very well, he's getting guaranteed money, he's just going to go along with what they want, you know. And that's how, to me, that's how it reads.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think also the time travel thing was probably in the air at the time.
Yeah.
When did the Wells story come out? I'm not sure when that was published, but it must have been around this time or slightly earlier.
1895.
Okay. So not too long before then, only sort of 30 years or so before.
Yeah.
So, and again, I think in those days, books would have taken time to percolate out, wouldn't they, through society kind of thing. It's not like now a book comes out and a year later or 2 years later there's a film, you know.
Yeah well, yeah, they haven't got the luxury of the internet. It was like you had to wait for, you know, they'd have to get physically transported to shops, and then you'd have to physically put an advert in the newspaper. The reviewers would have to physically wait for the book to arrive in the post before they could read it and review it. And then it's like everything just took time, didn't it? A lot longer. Whereas now it's just almost instant.
And it's almost gone in an instant as well, isn't it? That's the thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's elements of that. There's the atomic element, which obviously was just coming into being at the time. It feels like a lot of sci-fi elements of that specific time mixed into one story.
Yeah.
A little bit of Smith dust, yellow dust sprinkled on top, but not very much. There's your story. Thanks very much. Can I have me $50?
Yeah. You see, it is a strange one. Whereas it really is. Yeah.
But as always, dear listener, do let us know what you think. I think for us, that's the most disappointing story. Well, it's the only disappointing story so far. One or two nice touches, but there was nothing in there that would make me want to go back and read that again, particularly.
No, I mean, even the other story, because I mean, it's not actually really my cup of tea, that kind of story anyway. I'm not really into that kind of story. But when Smith's done it in the past, I have been into it because there's been enough of the weird and the fantastical to keep me interested, you know, with the strange creatures and weird plants and mushrooms and God knows what. Whereas this is kind of, and I think a lot of it for me is down to the structure. That it just kept deflating me every time I got in. By the end of it, I was just kind of like, you know.
Okay, so let's turn our back on the future. And I feel like we should have some of that dissolving music, little harp music going on there. And let us return to the past.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, the next story we're going to look at is The Justice of the Elephant. And we're very much back into more Smithian territory here, because this is another one that is very similar to the stories we covered in the last one, basically cautionary tale, isn't it?
Yeah, very sort of Arabian Nights kind of
fable kind of thing. Yeah, Arabian Nights, Grimm's fairy tales, Aesop's fables, that kind of stuff.
Yes,
you know?
Yes.
Yeah. The moral of the story: don't be a dick. You know. Yeah, and Justice of the Elephant was completed on December the 29th, 1930. And Clark Ashton Smith wrote to Lovecraft that the story is grim and gruesome, but Farnsworth Wright might take it since it doesn't involve the supernatural and is not at all poetic. The plot idea is quite similar to that of a tale which I sold to the Black Cat back in my boyhood. Smith's there referring to his story, The Mahout, which is first published in The Black Cat for August 1911. And that's was posthumously collected in a couple of the collections he did for Arkham House. I think it's classed as juvenilia, isn't it, that one?
Right, yeah.
Farnsworth Wright did indeed accept it.
Fanfare.
It's strange, isn't it? I know. With that, yeah, Farnsworth Wright accepted it, and I think it doesn't contain the weird or anything like that. For the editor of Weird Tales, that is such a strange thing to say.
No, there's nothing supernatural in this or
no
weird particularly at all, is there?
No. It was accepted for the August 1931 issue of Oriental Stories, and Smith was paid the princely sum of $14.
Wow, $14. Mind you, it's what, a 4-page story, so...
Well, yeah, 3.5, really.
3.5, yeah. And we are in India. The time is unspecified, but you get the sense this is maybe... Well, it could be any time from sort of 16th century onwards is the sort of feel I get for it.
Yeah.
And now, straight away, even with the opening line, I think, all right, yeah, we're back on track now, Mr. Smith. Nikhal Singh, Raja of Anupur, was acquiring the obese complacency of middle age, and his memories were blurred and befogged by a liberal use of Rajput opium. Smashing.
Yeah. It's interesting because that he said to Lovecraft that it didn't contain anything poetic, and then he opens with that line.
The obese complacency of middle age. Well,
yeah.
Moving swiftly on from that phrase.
yeah. I feel judged.
I haven't got any Rajput opium, though.
No. Worse luck.
I do have some custard creams in the cupboard, so I might be hitting those later.
Oh, careful.
So we have here the Raja of Anupur. Anupur is in northern India, Uttar Pradesh, and the Raja is the ruler of the region, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's not easy to say.
It's not.
The Raja is the ruler of the region.
Istanbul to Constantinople.
It is, it's one of those.
Yeah.
The vessel with the pestle. And the Rajput were a group of clans, sort of from about the 16th, 17th century onwards. They were basically groups of quite warlike clans. In fact, they developed a whole range of their own martial arts, some of which, just for martial art history fans, it is speculated might have been taken into China, because the martial arts, the Shaolin Temple, were brought to them by an Indian monk, Bodhidharma. So there's a certain strand of, or certainly the most famous Chinese martial arts, actually have their root in older Indian martial arts.
That is interesting.
But these clans were quite fierce folk, and they used to take opium before a fight, or they were given opium to take before a fight. So to me, there's parallels there with the berserkers being on mushrooms and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And there was the Thuggees were supposed to be on the hashish, weren't they?
Oh, right.
Yeah, the hashish eaters.
Right.
Yeah. Well, jumping forward in the 20th century, the Wehrmacht, they were all on speed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, a lot of pilots as well, and even modern day, apparently.
Yeah, apparently so, yeah.
So the Raja has a number of wives. He has one in particular called Amira that he seldom recalls, and really the only reason he remembers her is because she's been unfaithful to him.
Yeah, she was of low birth, originally a dancing girl, and her rise in the Raja's favour had not been regarded with unqualified approval by his legitimate wives.
And under those circumstances, it was not well advised for her to be conducting an affair with the comely young elephant driver, Ramadas. So basically, Ramadas is seen leaving her quarters one night, and the Raja gets word of this.
Yeah, because there were many jealous eyes to note the amour, and jealous tongues to bear tattle thereof to Nikhal Singh.
So, of course, such a deed cannot go unpunished, and the punishment inflicted by Nikhal Singh was no less swift than dreadful. The girl was condemned to a death usually reserved for the lowest criminals. Because her suspected lover Rama Das was chosen as her executioner. And this is I don't know how much historical truth there is in this, but as a method of execution, it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's quite imaginative, I suppose.
It is. It is. We've only got to look at some of the ones we do know of that were, Death of a Thousand Cuts and Drawing and Quartering and all that. I mean, the human race has no limits on its bounds for cruelty, really.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, yeah. So Amira is made to kneel and place her head on a block of stone in the palace courtyard. Thereupon the great elephant, ridden by Ramadas, at a signal from its driver, would lift one of his enormous hooves to bring it down on the head of the dancing girl, crushing her to an instant pulp. Well, I guess it's a quick end in that sense, you know.
Me being me, I see it as a film and I can hear the sound effect, like when somebody drops a watermelon, you know.
Messy. That's going to get very messy.
Yeah, not a nice way to go.
And as he's doing this, Ramadas shows no emotion at all. In fact, neither of them do particularly. But that night, he does disappear. He vanishes. The elephant man vanishes. Then we shoot ahead to 10 years later. And this scandal was long gone, long forgotten, overtaken by other scandals and gossip and the petty happenings of the palace. And it so happens that the position of mahout to Ragnar, the huge elephant that bore the Raja himself, became vacant through death. Who turns up to apply for the job?
Yeah, he's shaved his beard off and turned up ostensibly as a different chap. But yeah, Ramadas.
Yeah, he's now under the name Ram Chandar. I did wonder with this, just reading that again, the job became vacant through death. I wonder how that death happened. Did the man slip and fall off a balcony or something?
Yeah, well, there is that, isn't there? But again, this is what I mean. This is a contrast to the last story. It's because this is like 3.5 pages, but already my brain is going off thinking, so what happened to the other guy?
Yeah.
You know?
And he does fool everyone. Well, I suppose 10 years is a fair time. And to be fair, a Raja wouldn't be particularly looking at an elephant driver, would he? It's not someone he's going to... most servants to him would have been sort of faceless almost.
Yeah, well, you have the caste system and all that as well, don't you? So, you know, he wouldn't literally have looked at him.
And least of all would it have occurred to Nikhal Singh himself that the grave, taciturn, heavy-bearded Ram Chandar and the blithe, beardless Ramadas were the same person.
Oh, yeah, I got it the wrong way round. He'd grown a beard. That was his disguise.
Grow a beard, shave a beard, you know.
Yeah.
So Ram takes control of Ragnar. He gets the job and he starts training the elephant, starts spending time with it and builds up this strong rapport with it. And we get a hint of what's to come. And was even taught in private 1 or 2 tricks that are not usually part of the curriculum of a state elephant. And then we get news of an impending wedding.
Yeah. Nikhal Singh had grown fonder than ever of his opium and cared less and less for other pleasures or distractions. But now in his 40th year, for political reasons, it was agreed upon by his ministers that he must take another wife. So basically his previous wife had just died without leaving him a male heir. So, yeah, it's one of those to carry on the bloodline kind of deals.
Yeah, a sort of political marriage kind of thing. That's
yeah. It happened a lot with royalty, or it still does, doesn't it?
So, yeah. And of course, just like our own royals, you get a big state occasion.
Yeah.
Hurrah.
A lot of fanfare and
I do like this though. The day of the marriage dawned in torrid saffron. There's a great little phrase, torrid saffron.
That's what I thought it was in the last one, because that was the phrase I mentioned right at the beginning that I really like, torrid saffron. But yeah, I thought it was in the last one because of the saffron cloud, but it's not. It's in this. The day dawned in torrid saffron. That's a brilliant description of a sunrise, isn't it?
Yeah, that should be the name of a singer in some sort of, I don't know, Finnish metal band or something like that.
Yeah.
Lead singer, Torrid Saffron. That's a good name.
I can see that. Maybe a Eurovision act, something on Eurovision, something quite theatrical. And now, taking the stage, it's Torrid Saffron.
Excellent. So you get the big ceremony. You get Nikhil Singh on his howdah on the superb elephant Ragnar, passing slowly through the streets of Anupur, followed by the court dignitaries on other elephants and a small army of horsemen, all splendidly caparisoned. There's gun salutes going off. There's music. There's drums being banged. It's all, it's all a splendid occasion until.
Yeah, I love this. As the two processions neared each other, an event occurred which was not a prearranged part of the ceremonial. At a secret signal from Ramchandar, perceived and understood only by the elephant himself, Ragnar suddenly halted, reached into the great howdah with his trunk, seized Nikhil Singh in a tenacious embrace, and hailed the Raja forth in the most undignified and ignominious manner, and basically deposits him on his knees in the road and forces him to bow his head in the dust before the bride's approaching litter. Yeah, well, you can see where this is going, can't you?
Well, yes, it's an obvious replay of the execution of Amira.
Mm.
Ragnar raised one of his front hooves and calmly proceeded to crush the Raja's head into a flat, formless jelly.
Nice.
What I liked about that, if like is the word, is Amira, it's the elephant lifts one of its hooves and brings it down, bang.
Yeah.
This gives the impression he sort of places his foot quite gently on the king's head and goes like...
Squishes.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Squish.
Then, trumpeting wildly, menacing all who stood in his way and apparently defying the frantic signals and commands of his driver, Ragnar plunged through the crowd and vanished into the nearby jungle, still carrying Ramchandar and the empty howdah. So it's nice. He's got his revenge and he's made his escape. And this is where we get that word we spoke about earlier.
Mm.
It's thought that the elephant had obviously been seized by this madness that elephants are sometimes prone to, and has just gone off on one. They do find the elephant later, browsing peacefully in a jungle glade without his driver. Quite sad that they shoot the elephant. That's a bit unfortunate.
Yeah, I thought that he was collateral damage. I thought that was a real shame because, seemed like a pretty nice elephant.
Yeah, I wanted the elephant in just to ride off with the elephant into the sunset. That would have done me. But then I suppose it adds to the grimness of the story, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Yep, so it's just assumed that the elephant had gone mushed, and it was also assumed that it would have killed its rider, whose body was never found. Presumably he was just trampled on by the elephant and left in the jungle somewhere, because mad elephants are prone to wreak their malignity on all accessible victims, even their own mahouts. So it's considered very unlikely that Ramchandar could have escaped. So he wreaked his revenge and he made good his escape. Shame about the elephant, but, that's the justice of the elephant. There wasn't much justice for the elephant, was there, really?
No, poor elephant.
Yeah, it was the justice administered by the elephant, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's not such a snappy title, though, is it? So, yeah, I think, like you say, 3.5 pages there, but that's packed with Smithian goodness, a few good phrases, a nice grim tale, some ironic twists in there.
Yeah. It is strange. I feel there was more in that than there was in Futurity, even though that was almost a novella.
And again, that you could easily see as an adaptation, your Twilight Zone type 30-minute program.
Yeah. Yeah, Night Gallery, something like that.
So there we go, our 2 stories for the day. Quite a contrast, both in length and in quality. But do let us know what you think. If any of you have read The Adventure in Futurity, it is quite a long one to read. And I wouldn't say I found it a slog, but I think, like you said, I was skimming through little bits of it here and there.
Yeah, I do wonder if he was given a word count as well, because there was a lot, especially at the beginning. Like the first 3 or 4 pages was literally just a description of this chap.
Yeah.
And nothing really happens. I wonder if that was just literally padding out the word count, because they've said we want X amount of words.
It could be. It could
be.
So I think it would have worked better if you'd have cut down that first part and then dwelt more on the action scenes.
Yeah.
Or action, as Lovecraft and Smith called it. Because, of course, as we've discussed before, they were constantly being told to put more action into their stories, which was it was a bit of a bone of contention.
It was, especially with Lovecraft. Yeah.
Although when he did put action in, it turned out one of his best stories, The Shadow over Innsmouth. So
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. Righty-ho, yeah. Before we wrap up, we have a couple of messages in about our last episode. Our first one is from Tobias Nielsen. Splendid episode as always, and a fun coincidence that you've specifically read The Ghoul in this one, as only recently Jim Moon did a full reading of that story on his The Great Library of Dreams podcast. Now, this is one I'm not actually familiar with, so it was completely fresh in my mind. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't at all. And I do keep an eye out for podcasts. I do a Google search every now and again. So thanks for that, Tobias. I'll put that on the list and have a listen to that. I'm always interested to hear what other people say about things that we're doing, because they'll pick up on stuff that we don't. And also, whatever else they're covering that I might not know of as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to check that one out. And we have another very short message from David A. Riley, who says, great podcast. I enjoyed every minute of it. Well, thank you very much, sir. Thank you to everybody who listened and anybody who comments and things like that. It's much appreciated. It's always nice to get your feedback on these things.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. And David is the editor, I believe, of the excellent Sword and Sorceries anthologies. We'll put a link up to that below. They're putting out really great collections of new sword and sorcery stories. But yeah, do keep your comments coming in. You can get in touch at innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com. You can post on our Facebook page. We've also got a Discord server now set up. We'll put the link up to that in the notes below. And of course, you can also leave a message on our Patreon site. While you're on our Patreon site, please do consider signing up to help support the show. Remember, you support and get bonus episodes, not only for Strange Shadows, but also the Innsmouth Book Club as well. You get a quarterly copy of Innsmouth News, and you get free admission to all our events, such as the Innsmouth Literary Festival. Have we mentioned that? I think we did.
We did. You always mention it twice. Yeah.
And you can also subscribe at our first level of membership on Buzzsprout now. And we're pleased to welcome Rachel Parkinson as a new subscriber. Thanks very much for signing up, Rachel. And we'd like to give a quick shout out to our other patrons. That's Ulrich de Vetter, Mark Jenkins, David A. Riley, Gary Pennington, Brett Kramer, Aaron Vleck, Steve Meyer, Wingate Stites, Russell Journey, Justin Woodman, Lee Clark Zumper, Rick Seen, and of course our dear old friend Chris Carr. Thanks very much for your support. It is deeply appreciated. So what story are we covering next time, Tim?
Next time we are covering an absolute bona fide classic. We're going to be looking at one of my personal favourites, Return of the Sorcerer.
Excellent. I think they've got an alternative ending for that as well, haven't we?
We do. Yeah, I'm really interested that. Yeah. It's because apparently it was too gruesome to begin with, so he had to tone it down. So I'm looking forward to having a look at that, because I don't think I've ever read the alternative ending.
And hopefully we're going to be joined by our friends Mark, David and Richard from the 30 Plus Minutes with H.P. Lovecraft podcast. So we're looking forward to catching up and chatting with those guys as well. So we hope you can join us for that. Thanks very much for listening today. With that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.